Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Along with today being the full moon day, it's also the 31st of March, the very last day of our winter retreat for 2018. So I was just recollecting this is the 8th winter retreat that I've spent here at Amaravati, this time around anyway. In many of the branch monasteries of Wat Pah Pong, then at the end of the retreat season, in the Western monasteries, the end of the winter retreat, or in the Asian monasteries, at the end of the Vasa, the rainy season, then as was Luang Chah's custom, he would get all of the members of the Sangha to step up onto the Dhamma seat one by one, and invite everybody of the monastic community to give Dhamma talks, short or long, through the night. So some of you are probably getting anxiety attacks right now. So when I came to Amaravati from the States in 2010 and was getting settled in and considering how to fit in with the way of life here, it was made very clear to me that having all the members of the Sangha giving Dhamma talks at the end of the retreat season was not a good idea. So I thought, okay. So anyway, I've gone along with that for a few years, so maybe next year or the year after you can have a year of preparation for you can develop your anxiety, your performance anxiety issues over the next year or two. But I feel it's a good principle, because as one can reflect that, and as Master Hua once put it, that if you have enough faith and wisdom to come into a monastery, shave your head and put on the robes, and to live by the Vinaya discipline, you've got enough wisdom to offer to the community of people that have gathered together, even if you might not think that you have. And I feel that that's a good point. And also it gives an opportunity for individuals to consider, what have I learned? What has been important? What has been difficult? What is there to share with everyone? So anyway, just if you want to think about the future, something to ponder for future winter retreat events here at Amaravati. During this time, we've been having these readings from this wonderful biography written by Ajahn Amaro. It's a real masterpiece of a clear expression of the teachings, laying out Luang Chah's life, the principles of his practice, the history of his own spiritual development, and the growth of Wat Pah Pong and Luang Chah's community. So I feel that was a real treasure that Ajahn Amaro has brought into the world, and so sadhu to him. Great credit to him for that effort. Many years of work have gone into producing that, so it was lovely to be able to share that with the community, to have readings many days of the week, to be exploring those stories and those teachings, and to delve into the life of Luang Por Chah and to share that together, to particularly look at the principles that lie behind the way that Luang Por Chah established his monasteries, the teaching principles that he used, and the basic framework for training. One of the things in my own trajectory, when I went to Southeast Asia, I was on an extremely vague spiritual search. I was definitely going to Asia to look for spiritual direction. That was my intention in leaving England just after my 21st birthday. But it was an extremely vague and non-specific search. It was just go to Asia and wander around, and maybe with a bit of luck I'll run into something that's good. That was about as detailed as I was in my search. So I wasn't looking for a teacher as such. I didn't have the idea of finding a teacher. I didn't have a particular concept of a meditation practice. The word practice was just something that didn't really feature in my ideas or my thinking at that time. And when I arrived at Wat Pah Nanachat and then came into contact with the monastic community, the lay community there, and then meeting Luang Por Chah and getting a sense for the way of life and the principles of the Dhamma Vinaya as Luang Por Chah expounded them and embodied them, the way that they formed through the way of life of the forest monastery. The thing that was most striking to me was that it was really the way of life of the monastery that was the main teacher. That was the way that you learned, was the routine and the way of life of the monastery was the teacher, or essentially the way of life of the monastery helped you to teach yourself. And that, as I've said many times during the readings and on other occasions, one of the aspects of Luang Por Chah's genius was that even though he was a very charismatic person, very, very colorful, very, very powerful presence, and could be extremely wise, very charming, could be very, very witty, very funny, very, very direct. That he had this extraordinary ability, even though he was, as an individual, he was a powerful magnet. He had this way of, having drawn your attention to him, then what he was saying was, "Don't look at me, look at yourself." There was this extremely neat trick, or sort of spiritual footwork of how you really wanted to listen to him and pay attention to him. But what he said was "Don't look at me, look at yourself," and that was something that was, even though I couldn't speak Thai and couldn't really get any of the subtle aspects of what he was talking about, that was in a way the framework within which he taught, and that whenever you were around him, you could see that's how he operated. And again, as I've said many, many times during these readings, that one of the most interesting things was that even though he was very much the central figure, he was the person right in the middle, he was the very much the focus of attention. He didn't need people to like him or to revere him or to praise him or to say thank you to him or anything. He didn't need anything from anybody, really. And anyone who tried to flatter him or say, "Oh, Luang Por, thank you so much. You're so wonderful. You're so powerful. You're so marvelous. You've changed my life." You would either crack a joke or say something that was really embarrassing. He'd make you look completely foolish, or he just sort of he wouldn't be flattered. He wouldn't say, "Oh, well, thank you very much." He wouldn't be flattered, so he would often, there'd be different ways he would brush that aside, or help the person to look at themselves, or sometimes people would praise him or admire him but the main purpose behind their praise was actually that they would be seen as this sort of utterly devoted person. And if Luang Por saw that someone was looking to inflate themselves through their kind of keenness in Dhamma practice or their power of their devotion, he also had a way of looking through people. Like, he was so invisible, it wasn't like there was even anybody there to be invisible. It's like, you are not there. You can follow the meaning of that. It's like, so you're so not there, he's not even looking through you. It's like there is nothing to be looked through. Like, you are completely invisible. And so for someone who really wanted to be noticed or wanted to be sort of acknowledged as being a sort of super duper Dhamma practitioner and a kind of star devotee, they would get that kind of a feedback from him that I'm not even ignoring you. You just you're not on the radar. You don't even you're not even a blip on the radar that I'm ignoring. So, which would have its effect. That too would be a teaching tool. So this was made for myself a very I feel a very supportive and helpful dynamic. As I said, I wasn't looking for a teacher like a guru or looking for a particular system, so when other people came along to Wat Pah Pong or Wat Pah Nanachat, other Westerners arrived, or also Thai people joining the community from closer by, from the province of Ubon, or coming up from central Thailand, or even from the town of Warin, then there was much more the sense of looking to the teacher, or hoping Ajahn Chah was going to be the great master, and or the practice that was carried out at Wat Pah Pong. That was this sort of method that they would like to learn, the Luang Por Chah method. And in time, I became very grateful that I hadn't got any of those ideas, or hadn't had that sort of thought, that picture in mind. But it was much more of a broad scope, because at least as it came across at that time for myself, and also coming across in the biography that Ajahn Jayasaro's put together, that it was Luang Por's way to provide a very broad range of teaching methods, of skillful means. And whether it was formal meditation practice, whether it was listening to a Dhamma talk, whether it was joining in work projects, whether it was traveling on tudong, whether it was using the ascetic practices, using sickness or social situations, it was very clear that it was up to you to learn from every situation that you encountered in life. And it wasn't just a meditation method or particular words of instruction from the teacher. It was rather the whole of life is the teacher, if you let it teach you. And so I found that made so much sense to me, and it fitted very much with my own sort of method of arrival, that I'd come without very much in mind. I had no particular plan or search for a teacher. And so that very broad approach of everything will teach you if you let it, that fitted very, very closely with how I had been approaching things. And so I think it's one of the reasons why 40 years later I'm still sitting here with very much part of this community, and with great ongoing faith in this mode of practice, this way of life. And I feel so, continually impressed and appreciative of Luang Por Chah's way of being, and what he offered to the world, and through his own life, what he continues to offer. One of the things that I found, and it again comes across in the teachings and in Luang Por Chah's biography, was, even though he regarded Luang Pu Man as his teacher, he only spent about 3 days together with Luang Pu Man. That he didn't having found where he was living and having the opportunity to be nearby, he only stayed with him for 3 days and then traveled on. And so many people find that really, really strange. Well, if you found the great master, you found the great enlightened teacher, why didn't you just sort of tie yourself to the edge of his robe and just stay as close by as long as possible? But I found myself very affected, very impressed by the fact that Luang Por Chah didn't feel the need to stay physically close to the teacher, and that the principles that he imbibed, the basic essence of the Dhamma teachings that he got through being close to Luang Pu Man, that was what was important. And so it was not a significant factor to be physically close to the teacher, but rather having the insight of the teacher and the wisdom of the teacher's words really affect him deeply and help change the way he saw his own practice. He didn't need to be in the same place. He didn't have to share at the same sort of geographical space as the teacher, but rather could take that change of view, that change of attitude, and that depth of understanding, and apply it in his own practice wherever he happened to be. So when I heard that story early on in the time I was there at Wat Pah Nanachat, that made a lot of sense to me, and I really appreciated that, and also the teachings that you have in the suttas, where the Buddha, which also Luang Por Chah would quote from time to time, saying, if your heart is filled with greed, hatred, and delusion, you can be sitting face to face with the Buddha, and it's as if you are hundreds of miles away on the other side of the Himalayas. And the Buddha said, if you can be hanging on to the edge of my robe, but if your heart is filled with greed, hatred, and delusion, it's as if you're many, many leagues away, many miles away. But you can be actually sitting on the other side of the Himalayas. You could be hundreds of leagues away. But if your heart is free of greed, hatred, and delusion, it is as if you're sitting face to face with the Tathagata. And so this was a common theme for Luang Por Chah in the way that he spoke. And then in those early days, 40 years ago, there was only a couple of little pamphlets. It was before Bodhinyana had been put together. There was just a little typed up set of sheets called the Notes from a Session of Questions and Answers. That was the only thing in English in those days. But even within that, then Luang Por Chah made that clear. He said that the Buddha said, "One who sees me sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees me." If you see the Dhamma, then it's as if you're face to face with the Buddha. And that was such an oft repeated theme, and it fitted very, very closely with this principle of everything will teach you if you let it. If you don't let things teach you, then you can be face to face with the great master. You can literally be following Luang Por Chah around, spending hours and hours a day with him, or you could be face to face with the Buddha himself, and yet it wouldn't have any beneficial effect, because the attitude is say out of tune. The heart is filled with conceit or confusion, with greed, hatred, and delusion. So in that, also my character trait is if people are very excited about something, and they have like in the monastery, you often have fads where people get very interested in particular things, like kind of certain kinds of yoga practice, or astrology, or qigong, or Buteyko breathing, or those kind of, over the years there'd be sort of different fads happening in the monastery, or people get excited about certain teachers, or books would be circulating around as sort of some new hot guru has been discovered, and here, read this. So when my character trait is, when people get excited about something, I tend to lean in the opposite direction. I think just the kind of perversity, maybe it's some kind of just a negative streak within me. But what I found in those early days, and also just reading so many stories from Luang Por Chah's life, has been coming to my mind over these last few weeks, how the more that people were eager to have an excuse to get over to be at Wat Bapong from Wat Pananachart, it's only about 5 miles away, about 7 kilometers away. People would be looking for an excuse to go over and see Luang Por Chah, or get permission to go over and stay at Wat Bapong, or have a good reason to go and visit Luang Por Chah. That the more sort of excited and keen people were to go and spend time with Luang Por Chah, the more I found myself like, yeah, who needs it? I'm fine here. This is good. After all, he says, just everything will teach you if you let it. I don't need to be near the Ajahn. So maybe I wasted a few opportunities to go and spend time with him, but and so that was my own choices at the time. But also that sense of trying to get close, trying to be sort of getting near to the magnet, getting near to the great being. That sense of agitated, say, excitement, and the way it's sort of focusing on the person. This, I found myself leaning in the opposite direction. So maybe I missed a few opportunities. And over the 2 years that I lived in Thailand, not quite 2 years, less than 2 years, I probably spent a total of about 3 weeks in Luang Por Chah's company altogether, if you add up all the different times. So it wasn't very long. But I don't have any regret over that. I don't feel that I had missed an opportunity, really, when considering it, because I feel that message, both in his own way of drawing close to Luang Pu Man just for 3 days and then moving on, and also in that spirit of everything will teach you if you let it. That really resonated very, very powerfully with me, and you could see that it was true, that you could be literally sitting right at his feet, listening to him with a good translator right there. If he was visiting Wat Pananachart, or if we were over at Wat Bapong, and you could be right there, but you could be just lost in your own thought about, oh, my left knee, it feels really bad. Oh, I want, that's really painful. I hope I haven't injured myself. And even as Luang Por Chah is talking, you're kind of getting lost in your own worry, your own fear. You could be wondering about when he's going to shut up so you can have a sweet drink, or yes, it can happen. When's the Ajahn going to shut up so we can go and stretch our legs? And you can see it's absolutely true. You can be right there, face to face with a great enlightened being as they are teaching the Dhamma, and yet what's on your mind is that drink's getting cold. And I'm only the fourth novice, and there's only one kettle. And those monks have got pretty big cups. How much is going to be left for me when the kettle gets down to my end of the line? So if you were thinking you were having worldly thoughts, if you're the last Anagarikar and you're having worries about how many cakes are going to be left on the tray when you get to the servery, it's an ancient lineage of those who have been concerned with similar things over the years. I feel that also that, as was referred to a few times, the last 10 years or so of Luang Por Chah's life, when he could no longer speak, he couldn't move, and the strange mixture of him being present but unable to speak, that was an amazing sort of learning process for the community. It's very challenging, but difficult in some respects, but quite amazing in the way that it helped to convey that process, that teaching of, are you ready to learn from this? Is this person in the wheelchair who's sort of slumped in a heap, is this the teacher, or are you your own teacher? Are you going to let everything teach you, or are you going to think the teacher is gone, he can't speak, because Luang Por Chah can't speak anymore? how is it? So that was a very powerful and challenging, but amazing time, and a challenge to rise up to that test. Can you be in the presence of the teacher who can't speak anymore, but yet use the teaching? Can you receive that teaching and be changed by it? Can you recognize, this is exactly what he spoke about for so long, that Sabbe Sankara Anicca, all conditioned things are impermanent. The body is not self. Rupang Anatta. Sanya Anatta. Perceptions are not self. He spoke about those themes so often, so repeatedly, and here it is. The teacher can't speak, he can't act, he can't choose in his movements, in his thoughts and words. They are no longer under personal control. Can we use that teaching? Can that be taken in? Can that inform the way we relate to our own abilities? When you say you're joining in with the chanting and suddenly a word disappears and you can't remember what word comes next. It's okay if you're not leading the chanting. If you're leading the chanting, then it gets more interesting. You meet somebody and you think, what's her name? We've been in the same community for years. What's her name? These things happen, So, are we ready to? It happened many years ago. Lumpur Sameto was on a kind of seminar with a number of scientists and philosophers, and he had one of the monks along from the community, and he forgot his name. And he'd known him for years and years. Another Western monk, and he thought, this is ridiculous. I've known him for years. What's his name? And he couldn't remember. And he was... So, of course, they're meeting all sorts of other people from different groups and universities and different spiritual centers. And so Lumpur was thinking, there's a moment's going to come when I have to introduce this monk. And I can't remember his name. He's the abbot of one of the branch monasteries right now. So you all know him. But at that time, 30 years ago, his name just vanished from Lumpur Sameto's memory. It's like, it's gone. I don't know what his name is. He could remember what he was called when he was a novice, but his bhikkhu name was completely gone. So these things happen. So how do we relate to that when our faculties disappear? When you think people are really mumbling more and more, that they don't teach people to enunciate properly. Everyone's mumbling. Why don't they speak up? Or the audio and the sound in the sala is really, on a weekend there's so much noise that people just, I can't hear what people are saying. It's all just a blur of sound. We need to change the acoustics. Well, maybe we need to get a hearing aid. How do we relate to our changing faculties? Do we see it as a terrible loss or a challenge, or, oh dear, not that one, or not me, that's not fair, not now? Or do we recognize, oh yeah, that's what's been on the cards all these years, that's been there in the small print ever since we signed the contract at birth. That was always there, that it's all heading in one direction. Are we ready? Is the heart ready for that? And so Lumpur's latter years were an amazing gift. As Ajahn Jayasaro put it, you couldn't say it was there was a sort of a gift in disguise. You wouldn't want to call it that, but there were many blessings and powerful teachings that came forth from that situation, and it really challenges us to say, can we learn from everything? Our own diminishing faculties, our own loss of energy, or the ability to hear or see or think or remember the name of our Ajahn or our fellow monastics or our spouse, that are we able to use those situations? One of the most powerful, say, exchanges that when I was very new in the training, when I was an anagarika, and I was very enthusiastic. I saw a tremendous blessing that came from the forest monastic life and the meditation. My mind was very much all over the place and filled with 10,000 thoughts, but I saw the great benefit and blessing of the training. But in a way, one of the most potent exchanges for me, and what really cemented that quality of faith in the heart, in the faith in this particular form of practice, and also faith in Luang Por Chah as a teacher, was an incident that I've recounted many times, and I think it's in the it's slightly misquoted, but not too badly, in the biography. And it was one morning. I was the attendant for Ajahn Amaro. He was the abbot of Wat Pah Nanachat. And so it was my job to look after getting his robes and bowl organized, and to go with him on the alms round into Bungwai village in the morning. So that usually we set off in those days at 6:30. And at that time, Luang Por Chah was staying over at Nanachat for a few days. And so it was my job also to get his robes and bowl organized, as well as Ajahn Amaro. And on this particular morning, I've never been a morning person. Well, actually, it's not true. I'm a bit more of a morning person now. The first 30 years were very challenging. So I wasn't a morning person for the first 30 years, but the last decade's been quite good. So seriously, I'm much more okay with getting up in the morning. But for the first 30 years, it was a real challenge. I was more of a night hawk person. So on this particular occasion, I woke up, and usually I had a fairly good, loud alarm, and I woke up, but I hadn't heard my alarm, and so my assumption was I woken up before the alarm went off, which was we'd go off at 3 a.m. And then the next thought was, wow, the moon is really bright. Because the little kutis that we had in those days were just sort of very basic wooden slats, sort of like a single layer of wooden boards nailed up on the frame, and so there was often cracks between the boards, and the windows had just sort of gaps between the shutters and such like. And so there was just bright light coming through the cracks between the boards of my kuti in my kuti walls. So, wow, the moon is really bright. And then the next thought was, that's not moonlight. So, and then the next thought was, if that's not moonlight, that's daylight. Eek! And so I looked at my clock, and of course it was not ticking, and it had stopped at something like 1:20 in the morning. And so I had no watch. That was the only timepiece I had, so I had no idea what time it was. It was definitely broad daylight, so I sort of threw my robes on and went hurtling through the forest. My kuti was only about 150 meters away from the sala, so I didn't have too far to run. So I got to the back of the sala, came through the doors at the sala at Wat Nanachat, and the clock used to be on one of the pillars towards the back of the sala. So I came in, I saw. There was Luang Por Chah and Ajahn Amaro sitting at the end of the bench, the asana, and sort of sitting chatting with each other. And I looked at the clock, 6:25. Phew! So okay, I'm safe. Okay, just play it cool. Just kind of make like nothing's happened. They won't have noticed, because I'm way at the back. In the dim light of the early morning, they won't have noticed that I wasn't there for the morning chanting or the morning meditation, and I can just sort of glide in and kind of fake it, and just to get their robes ready, and everything will be on time for setting off on the alms round at 6:30. So that sense of having done wrong and hoping no one finds out, and as long as wrongdoing doesn't matter as long as they don't know. That sort of principle, it's only wrongdoing if they find out, was how I've lived most of my life. So maybe some of the rest of you have also functioned on that basis, that you only feel sorry if you get discovered. If you don't get discovered, you don't feel sorry. Unfortunately, that's a very common human trait. So anyway, I was trying to sort of fudge it and to hope they didn't notice. But as mentioned many times in the biography by Ajahn Amaro, Luang Por Chah was a very observant person, a very good reader of people's body language and gestures and expressions and so forth. And so even though I sort of got into the sala at 6:25 and had 5 minutes to get their robes and bowls together and just sort of be organizing things for them, it was, I guess it was apparent that I had only just woken up. I guess my eyes were all sort of puffy and kind of had that sleeping Anagarika had just woke up written in large letters all around me. But Luang Por Chah was very unchallenged, very easy for him to read that. So I was just organizing their robes and tying up the loops and tags on the corners of Luang Por Chah's robes as he was sort of putting them on over his shoulders. And then he said something in Thai, and of course I couldn't understand a single word of Thai at that point. So I looked sort of slightly anxiously up to Ajahn Prabhakaro, and so and Ajahn Prabhakaro kind of smiled and said, Luang Por says, sleep is delicious. Non lap olai mak. Sleep is delicious. And then I looked at Luang Por Chah's face, and he had this huge sort of foot wide, he had a very big mouth, but he had this sort of grin about a foot wide across his face. And there was absolutely no kind of negativity, no sort of criticism, no fault finding. There was just this extraordinary affection and warmth that was there. And I'd never known that from an authority figure. Whenever I'd done wrong or done something bad, I did a lot of rule breaking growing up, both in the family and in schools and everywhere, many places. So my clashing with authority figures or going against the wishes of authority figures usually resulted in being scolded or being punished in some way, shape, or form, and at least being scowled at and kind of told off and put in my place as having done wrong, being sort of bad and wrong and out of order. You shouldn't have acted in that way. And there was this incredible warmth, just this complete absence of any negativity there. No kind of blame, no criticism. Just this quality of total friendliness. And at that moment, I had this sort of a kind of I couldn't actually hear it, but there was this sort of almost like this sort of clicking into place of the heart, the sort of changing of gear in the heart, where something said, "This is a very different system. This is not an institution that you like anything you've ever been in ever before. This is different." And so, even as I said, even though I had a lot of faith in the teaching and the way of life and the practice of that, I was very inspired and very keen. That moment, there was like a whole shift of perspective. It's like, oh, this really is different. It's a system. It's a very much an institution. It's a very, very old institution. The school that I went to was founded in 1576. But that was still 2,000 years after the after the Buddha. Yeah. So I thought that was an old institution, but the Buddha was 2,000 years before that. So that is a very old, ancient, antiquated institution, and very fixed in its ways. But it was a completely different kind of institution. Certainly as embodied by Luang Por Chah. And in Ajahn Asaro's biography, another of the passages that he recounts, I could relate to absolutely perfectly when Luang Por Jan, one of Ajahn Chah's senior disciples, one of the very earliest monks of Wat Pah Pong, there's a portrait of him in the sala, the one near the back of the sala, on the wall close to the servery, Luang Por Jan. And he was a very sort of vigorous young man when he joined Luang Por Chah, and a very kind of strong and intense character. And Luang Por Jan describes how one day when he was having the meal at Wat Pah Pong in the very very early days of their community, and he was really hungry, and he was sort of chomping down on his ball of sticky rice and really enjoying the food, and then he suddenly he realizes, oh dear, I'm really enjoying this a lot. Maybe I'm getting lost in the world of flavor and taste, and so he was sort of worried about what it looked like and whether he was having too much enjoyment as he was eating his food. And he looked up at Luang Por Chah, kind of afraid that sort of he was going to get the wagging finger, like kilate, this is defilements taking over. You shouldn't be enjoying your food. But he described exactly the same thing, that Luang Por Chah has just got this big grin on his face, like, wow, this boy really can eat. This lad really likes his tucker. And the loving warmth of a caring parent, a caring father, just enjoying the sight of one of his lads tucking into a good meal, and really enjoying his food, and that not meeting with a sort of scolding or criticism, but a sense of empathy and a feeling of love and warmth, a sense of affection from the parent to the child. And so that was a powerful moment for me. I was probably also glad not to be scolded, but it was more than that. It really was a recognition that I had never been in an institution or a group or a system that related to a discipline in that way. You could make a mistake and get something wrong, do something badly, but it was met with a whole different attitude. There was a recognition that you just woken up, you've just been asleep, but as he says, sleep is delicious. And that there no kind of blame on that, recognizing, we've all been there. I know that we've all been in that place, and so that sense of empathy. And another of the aspects of Luang Por Chah's way of being and his skill as a teacher was that he never set himself above or apart from people. Again, my grasp of the Thai language was very, very minimal. But when you saw him, when you would go to visit Wat Pah Pong, or he would be visiting Wat Pah Nanachat and receiving guests and talking to people, over and over again, people would say, "Oh, I've got this problem. I'm arguing with my brother, and we have this ongoing fight, and it's so difficult to know what to do. We're always clashing. We're always fighting with each other. What should I do?" And Luang Por would say, "Oh, I was the same. Atamagomungan." He'd say, I was the same." Or someone would say, "Oh, I've got this insatiable lust. Every woman I look at, I want to sleep with her, and it's really getting exhausting, and I'm fed up with my mind." And Luang Por would say, "Atamagomungan. I was that way too." Or someone, one of the novices of the monks would say, I always, every day at the mealtime, I even though I tell myself, okay, I should just have a ball of sticky rice just big enough to fit in my hands, and I'm definitely not going to eat too much today. Today, absolutely, definitely, 100%. I'm not going to overeat today. There's a firm determination, a solid adhitthana, and then I do it again. Somehow, the food in my bowl looks just like such a tiny amount, this kind of little tiny puddle in the bottom of my bowl, and my mind says, that can't be enough. It can't be. And so I take as much as I think is going to be, maybe not even quite enough, and then I can't finish it. Every day. What should I do, Luang Por? And then he'd say, Atama gamungan. I used to be the same too. That whether there's a novice or the members of the monks community as well. Gamungan, I was the same. So he always spoke from that place of, I've been there. And I wasn't there on this particular occasion, but in one of the recorded dialogue series with Luang Por, someone makes this comment, and they say, Luang Por, it's amazing, I've been sitting here listening to you for hours, and people have all these different questions, and they ask you about their personal problems, or their meditation, or the Dharma teachings, or what the Buddha taught about this and that and the other, and you've got an answer for everybody. I mean, you must have studied for so long. You must have learned all the suttas. You must have spent years and years studying Abhidhamma to develop so much wisdom. And he's just said, no. If I have any wisdom, it's only because of having enormous defilements. That because I have so much of a history of lust, anger, restlessness, fear, doubt. It's because of having so much experience with enormous kilesas, kilet yai, kilet na. They say like thick kilesas. That's the source of any wisdom that I have, has been having to deal with fear and anger and lust and restlessness. The only one he didn't specialize in was dullness. I think the others are all so hot. But all the other nivaranas, the hindrances, were also so active. He couldn't really find a place to fit dullness into the picture. But as far as I can tell from his dialogues and his teachings, the most of the other defilements and hindrances he had in large and colourful quantities. So that quality of speaking from his own, not just his own experience, but that recognition of his own shortcomings, of having been lazy or fearful or angry or restless and lustful and filled with doubts and uncertainty, that he spoke from that place of I've been there, I know that, sleep is delicious. Or like I was telling the story the other day about when he was traveling with Ajahn Pasno. And as I said, the standard is you take a ball of sticky rice that's as big as your hands. And Luang Por Chah's hands are very small. He had little tiny hands and tiny feet. So technically, the ball of sticky rice that he was supposed to have was not very large. He said, when I was younger, I could pack it really tight. You can get an extra 30% into your rice ball if you really work at it. He said, but now I'm getting old. My fingers are not strong. I can't pack my rice as tight as I used to. And again, as a sort of as a comment of affection of we like our food, don't we? We enjoy our taka, our food, and something in us always wants to have a bit more just in case. And that just a little comment like that, to be sharing with a student, a young Westerner, and to be able to say, acknowledge that, not feel like I'm the great arahant. I would never even think about eating too much or food. Oh yes, we do eat every day, don't we? He wouldn't have a kind of false superiority, but rather he spoke from his own basis of work, his own kammatthana, what he'd had to work with and what had learnt from. And I feel in terms of our own training as his students, those who've come after, this is extremely helpful for us as individuals, because many of us, talking with so many of you here in the community, monastic community and the lay community, often we feel self-critical, or we're so filled with doubt or confusion, or got obsessions with food, or with our living space, or our robes, or with other people that we're kind of annoyed by, or kind of we're afraid of, or that we feel we have this whole set of difficulties. And often the feeling is, the attitude that's conveyed is, if only I didn't have this particular obsession, it would be great. If I didn't have this food thing, or if I didn't have this difficult person, or I didn't have this person I was in love with, or if I didn't have this illness, or if I didn't have this doubt, if I could just get past this fear, this doubt, this aversion, then everything would be great. And that's natural enough, and again, I would say, I've certainly been there myself. But if we take this principle of Luang Por Chah's own way of training, then rather than wishing that those issues, our obsession with our health, or our family, or our attachment to our body, or our mind, or our knowledge, or our perception of ourselves, critical or inflated, whatever it might be, that if we say, well, that's the teacher, that irritation, that difficult relationship you have with your Ajahn, or with you have this incurable illness, or you have this difficult member of the family, or this responsibility, or this terrible event in your past that you can't forget, that something that you've done, or something that happened to you, to say, okay, this is the teacher. That's not a thing that's in the way. That's my teacher. That's my Ajahn. And so you can hear these words. Everything is teaching us. If you let it, and say, "Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, very good, cool. That's great. That's great." But say, "I want everything to teach me except that." Except my relationship with my mother, or except that illness, or except that bloody idiot in the next room. Everything will teach me except him. But no, that's the lesson. That's what we are, really challenged to learn from. But if we take Luang Por Chah's example, if we really are embodying his way of practice and listening to his advice, then we go, oh, right, okay. That one too, that the inability to get up in the morning, that, sleep is delicious. Yeah, I've been working with this for the last decade. Yeah, it's still delicious, but what am I doing about it? Am I learning from this? And then when we turn towards those particular difficulties, those challenges, then rather than that, if only it wasn't here, everything would be fine attitude, there's a change of heart. There's that, oh right, this is a powerful teacher. There's important things that can be learned from this, right? And then that turning of the heart changes the way that what's seen as an obstacle or a problem, it's not seen as an unwelcome intruder, but rather a precious friend, a beloved friend, maybe a difficult friend, but a beloved and difficult friend. Like, oh yeah, that's something that can really bring blessings into our life. It can bring lessons that we would not learn other ways. That we are say, challenged, but through those challenges we learn to raise our game. We are caused to discover resources within ourselves. We, as Luang Por Chah said, that wisdom that he developed was from dealing with a string of obstructions and difficulties that he had to learn how to work with, and that the result of it was incredible blessings for all of us. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening.